A financial risk manager has 3 routes to get to the office. The probability that she gets to the office on time using routes X, Y, and Z are 60%, 65%, and 70%. She does not have a preferred route and is therefore equally likely to choose any of the 3 routes. Given that she arrives to work on time, the probability that she chose route Z is closest to. So we're going to be using a conditional probability formula here. So the probability of us choosing route Z is going to be 33%. So we know that because we're equally likely to choose any of the 3 routes. So it's 1/3 for each of these. And so you see that reflected down here. And then you're multiplying that by the probability of getting there on time for route Z, which is 70%. So that's going to be our numerator. And then in the denominator, we're going to be dividing this by all 3 of the different outcomes. So we're going to take that first outcome, probability of Z, times the probability of getting there on time using route Z, 70%. And then we're going to do the same thing for these other 2 routes. So it's going to be 1/3 times 65% for this Y portion, and then 1/3 times 60% given this X portion. And so when we work that through, we get 2.3333 divided by 2.333 plus 2.167 plus 0.2, which gives us 0.3589. And we round that up to get answer A. A type 1 error is made when A, the null hypothesis is rejected when it shouldn't be rejected. B, the alternative hypothesis is rejected when it should be rejected. Or C, the null hypothesis is accepted when it should be rejected. So we can rule out B right off the bat. Since we're never going to be rejecting the alternative hypothesis, we're only going to be rejecting the null hypothesis. So that leaves our 2 answers: the null is rejected when it shouldn't be, or the null is accepted when it should be rejected. So this one is going to be answer A. Type 2 is going to be what's described in answer C. Type 2 is when we not accept the null, but fail to reject the null when we should have rejected it. Type 1 is going to be when we reject it when it shouldn't have been rejected. Answer A. Consider the following information. Portfolio A's variance of return is 45. Portfolio B's variance of return is 42. And correlation of returns is 0.48. The covariance of returns between portfolios A and B is closest to. So we're going to be using our correlation formula to solve this, and we're going to have to adjust some of the terms, but we'll start with correlation, which is going to be given at 0.48, and then that's going to be equal to the covariance of A and B, and then we're dividing that by standard deviation of A times standard deviation of B. We're not given covariance, so that's what we're solving for. We are also not given standard deviation, we're given variance. So in order to transform that, we're going to take the square root of the variance to transform that into standard deviation. So when we work that through, these get multiplied together and then they're going to get moved over to this side. So we're going to have X equals 0.48 times 43.4741, which was the product of these 2 together. And we do that, we get 20.8676, which if we round that, that'll be closest to answer A. From a population of 10,000, a researcher chooses a sample of 1,000 observations. If the population standard deviation is 100, the standard error of the sample mean is closest to. Let's bring in our formula here. This is going to be a pretty straightforward formula. The main key here to know or understand is we're looking at the sample mean. So we're going to be using these sample observations of 1,000. This 10,000 is not what we're going to use for our n. So our standard error is going to be standard deviation, which was given at 100, divided by n raised to, the square root of n. So 1,000, square root of 1,000. And we work that through, we get 3.1623, answer B. And the reason that we're using the 1,000 for n and not 10,000 is because we're looking at the standard error of the sample. We're not looking at the whole population. We are still using the population standard deviation, but the standard error is giving us an idea of how our sample might vary from the population standard deviation. Chris McKay has a portfolio that consists of 75% equities and 25% bonds. Equities should return 18% and bonds return 9%. The correlation between equities and bonds is 30%. If McKay's strategy related to the bonds consists of keeping them until maturity, his portfolio's rate of return is closest to. So we're looking at rate of return here. We do not need to consider the correlation when we're looking at rate of return. We're just going to take the weightings of these and then apply them to their applicable returns. So we take 75% equities, multiply that by 18%, and then we're going to add to that 25% bonds, multiply by the 9% bonds return, gives us 15.75, which will be answer C. Correlation is going to be considered for standard deviation and portfolio standard deviation calculations, but it's not considered for returns. Janice McIntosh is performing statistical analysis on the equity market of Algeria. She is attempting to predict the effects of a recent technology regulation on the forecasted EPS of software houses. She collects financial data concerning 40 software houses. McIntosh calculates sample mean and sample standard deviation of 33.05 and 0.1185 respectively. Based on her collected sample, she forecasts that the EPS value is expected to equal 35.2. Based on the data collected and using the central limit theorem, the standard error of the sample mean is closest to. So let's bring in our formula here. We've got some extra data points thrown in here to try and throw us off. So we don't need to be using this forecasted EPS value. We would be using that if we were testing for the t-stat or something like that. And we also don't need the sample mean. That would be also used if we were doing t-stat. So those are just kind of thrown in there to throw you off. What we want for standard error of the sample mean, we're going to be using standard deviation in the numerator, and then denominator will just be the square root of our n, or number of observations. Number of observations are these 40 software houses. So we take this value given, standard deviation 0.1185, and then we're going to divide that by that square root of 40, gives us 0.01873. And if we round that, we'll be closest to answer B. Consider a 30-year annuity with the first annual payment of $120,000 starting today. Assuming an interest rate of 6% per year compounded annually, the present value of this annuity is closest to. So we're going to be using time value of money on the calculator. Let me pull that back up. And these are going to be our inputs here. So we'll have N of 30, since we're 30 years, and we're doing annual payments, so no adjustment needed there. Interest rate of 6%. Present value is given at present value is what we're going to be solving for, so we don't have to put anything in there. Future value will be 0 when we're looking at an annuity, and first payment of today is going to be $120,000. So we're going to compute present value now. And one thing we need to adjust here, because the first annual payment starts today, we need to go into beginning mode. So we go into beginning mode, and then we'll hit compute present value. Sorry. And so we should get 1.75 million. Answer C. Which of the following is least likely a method that an investor uses to assess geopolitical risk? So least likely, meaning 2 of these will be used and 1 will not. So we've got A, velocity of impact, B, likelihood of its occurrence, or C, recurrent nature of its impact. So our answer here is going to be C, and talking through why a lot of times geopolitical risks are going to be very idiosyncratic in nature, and they're going to be one-offs and very unique situations. You wouldn't expect a certain war event or most geopolitical risks, you're not going to expect them to be recurring. They're more so going to be low frequency, potentially high risk events. And so the key things we're going to want to look at, we're going to want to look at the likelihood. So what's the probability of something actually happening from a geopolitical standpoint? And then velocity of the impact. So how quickly does this have an impact on the economy and markets and whatnot? Is it going to be instant because it's some huge big event that's going to have a very instant, fast impact? Or is it going to be more of a slow burn where this could happen, but the economy can kind of keep going and the geopolitical risk is kind of on the side there, but maybe becomes an issue if it goes on for too long? So I rambled a bit there, but we're going to go with answer C. A sampling method where each outcome has an equal chance of being selected is most accurately referred to as A, random sampling. This is probably going to be our answer. Random sampling does have an equal chance of being selected. So when we take that population, we decide how much we want in our sample, and you basically randomly choose, and each different observation in the population is going to have an equal chance of being selected. B, systematic sampling. This will not contain an equal chance because it's going to say, okay, we'll take every fifth observation. So every fifth observation is going to get picked, and based on the ordering is essentially going to choose what gets selected. So not every single observation is going to have an equal chance of getting picked. And sampling distribution, this is more so a concept in statistics. It's not a sampling method. So that brings us back to answer A. There's a 40% chance that the economy keeps sinking into recession next year and a 60% chance that it will rebound. If the economy rebounds, company ABC will hire 2,000 employees. If the economy keeps sinking, there's an 80% probability that we'll cut 1,000 jobs and a 20% chance to go bankrupt and cut 9,000 jobs. The firm's expected job hires cut is closest to. So this is essentially going to be a big weighted average problem. So we have 40% chance that we're sinking and 40% chance that we'll rebound. So we're going to take this 60% chance that we rebound, we're going to apply this to the 2,000, and then we're going to take this 40% chance, and then we'll have to do one additional layer for this 80% and 20%. But let me pull in the numbers before we talk through it more. So we're taking weighted average here. So rebound under this scenario, we're expecting the overall expectation for this then would be adding 1,200 jobs, since we're taking 60%, multiplying by adding 2,000 employees. And then under sinking, there's one additional layer here. So if we sink, there's an 80% chance that we cut 1,000 jobs. And that's given right here. And then there's a 20% chance we go bankrupt and cut 9,000 jobs. So under these scenarios, we're expecting to cut 800 or 1,800. These are going to be these contributions here. So then the overall contribution is going to be 0.4 times these two added together. So that gives us our sinking weighted average of 1,040. So we'll take the difference between 1,200 and 1,040, and that's going to give us an expected, including all 3 or 4 of these different scenarios, of adding 160 employees.